Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for checking out this month's didactic. I'm hoping even in this recorded session, I can offer some insight in terms of what districts are doing, the latest movements from the state in terms of providing guidance, and then also some strategies parents can use for collaboratively working with their IEP teams and also supporting their students with special needs at home. Obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty in the educational landscape. A lot of things are unknown, but we're a lot farther ahead from where we were in March, April. So hopefully this can be helpful, and I'm definitely available for follow-up, even if not live online after this presentation via email. So I'm happy to chat more about anything kind of as things progress. Okay, so the learning objectives for today, I switched number 2 and 3 from when I emailed Chelsea, but number 1, define the key differences between what everyone was referring to as emergency remote learning in the spring and then distance learning. So it's a different term because there's a lot of different guidelines in place now that were not in place in the spring, and then what that means for families this fall. Then supporting parents with collaboration and advocacy strategies they can use with their child's IEP team to ensure the best provision of services that we can get during this strange, distance learning situation. And then helping parents identify realistic strategies they can use to support their child with special needs at home. So part 1, the educational landscape during COVID-19. There have obviously been some changes even since March when schools were originally forced to close. The term emergency remote learning, every district seemed to react differently towards the end of March when school closures originally started happening. Some districts closed for 2 or 3 weeks and said, we'll figure it out in 3 weeks after spring break. And we'll open up when we have our feet under us and we can figure out what to do moving forward. Other districts seem to turn around in 24 hours and were able to implement some sort of online platform for students, whether that was live instruction or independent work or just work being sent home. So it was really across the board in terms of what districts were doing and what that looks like. We now have in distance learning a big difference from emergency remote learning is the minimum required daily instructional minutes, which varies slightly based on grade level and age, but there are definitely a lot more requirements from districts and a lot clearer guidance from the state level. All right, so here is a nice infographic from, this is from an actual school district, but pretty, they cite the AB 77 Section 34 law, which is outlining a lot of what districts need to provide for their students and their families beginning in the fall. So I used this infographic. There's a lot of good info in here. So a big component that's different is the academic piece, right? There were no real guidelines in place saying we need to maintain the content aligned to grade level standards. It was sort of the best you can do. Right now we actually have the California Assembly bill mandating distance learning shall include content aligned to grade level standards that is provided at a level of quality and intellectual challenge substantially equivalent to in-person instruction. Okay, so there's a lot more effort going on in the back end from teachers, instructional specialists to make sure we're able to provide this education to our students, even in the distance learning scenario. A consistent learning platform. So this district was using Google Classroom as the primary learning management platform. A lot of districts are using Zoom, so that might vary, but there are always district-approved tech tools for each district. They're likely whatever they were using in the spring because they'll have paid subscriptions to these sorts of things. Then there's this breakdown between live instruction or synchronous instruction and then asynchronous instruction or the independent piece. So I'll go over what each of those, what's included in each of those umbrellas. But essentially the state is mandating daily live synchronous instruction and a required number of instructional minutes for all students. The daily live instruction can include activities such as check-ins and office hours, whole class discussions, progress monitoring. So the umbrella is is quite large, but there is definitely a push for live instruction, although it's not going to be more than 50% of the day, because research is telling us that for equity reasons, for comprehension reasons, screen fatigue, all these things are really impacting a child's ability to learn throughout the school day. So there's a push for live instruction daily, but it's not going to be all day, every day. That's pretty hard to manage for teachers and students. So asynchronous work will definitely be a part of distance learning. Attendance. Attendance is a big one that, for some districts at least, kind of fell off the wayside in the spring. State is mandating daily attendance and record keeping again, and they continue to focus on student check-ins and access. There's guidelines put in place for students who, I think, miss 3 days in a row, right? So we're having a tiered approach, just as we would if a student was missing those in-person days. And then we have a bell schedule. So this might not be true for all districts, but many are creating their own bell schedule, a distance learning bell schedule, which will likely be different than what it was in, when brick and mortar school buildings were open. But the idea being the structure is necessary. It's going to support the access to live instruction and independent work. So you're going to have times of the day that are more live and times of the day that are more independent work. This is also going to allow service providers, right, speech paths, OT, school psychs, to more easily schedule time for the service provision, right? So if they have regular live instruction times, they can work around that. And also teachers have a chance to sort of organize between classes. Students have a chance to do the same, right? Screen fatigue is a thing. So much more intentional in terms of educational programming. Okay, so the distance learning definition. Distance learning means instruction in which the pupil and instructor are in different locations and students are under the general supervision of that teacher. So it does include interaction, instruction, and check-ins between the teachers and the students through a computer or communications technology, right? So in the spring, some students, all they had was a cell phone, pretty hard to do anything in Google Docs simultaneously while the teacher is giving live instruction, for example. So the district now has the onus of making sure that the student and family are provided with the appropriate technology. Chromebooks are probably the most common thing that districts are purchasing to make sure that every family has access. Also hotspots, ensuring that family has access to Wi-Fi hotspots there's a big push for that as well. So access is definitely on the radar for districts in a way that it wasn't for all districts, at least in the spring. Video or audio instruction, more often than not, it will be video, in which the primary mode of communication between the student and teacher is online interaction. This could be videos, telecourses, or other sort of communications technology. And then use of print materials. There is some of that as well. Okay, so the required instructional minutes for this year shall be determined as follows. For in-person instruction, it's per usual, right? The amount of time the student spends at the brick and mortar school building. So when we fade into that, if hopefully when we fade into in-person instruction all day, instructional minutes will be counted per usual. For distance learning, instructional time shall be based on the time value of assignments. So this is where there's the explanation for live synchronous instruction not being the only minutes that are counted, but rather asynchronous independent work is also included in that because it's based on the time value of assignments or the estimated time that an assignment should take a student, whether it's projects, reading, discussion boards, things like that. Anything that's not live with a whole group and a teacher. And then for a combined day of instruction delivered through both in-person and distance learning, so like a hybrid or blended learning program, it's going to be a combination of those two, obviously. Some districts are discussing this, working towards this. At least they were before, the latest mandate from the governors. The public health orders obviously change daily. A lot of districts are trying to at least implement some sort of blended or combined program for students with special needs, or just students with a higher need for some reason. So there is a push for this. We don't know what this will look like. Again, it probably will depend on public health orders, week to week, day to day even, and also district, and certainly the needs of the students. Okay, so more on the required instructional minutes. The time should be based on the time value of assignments. For this fall, it's 180 instructional minutes in kindergarten, 230 for grades 1 through 3, 240 minutes for grades 4 through 12 daily, 180 for those in continuation school. So you're looking at about 4 hours in grades 4 through 12, or 1 through 12 really. And most of the time it's going to be those first 4 hours of the day, right? 8 to 12, 9 to 1, somewhere in there, so that we can organize around hours of instruction, hours of service provision for those individualized services, groups, that sort of thing. Okay, so some clarity on synchronous versus asynchronous instruction. So synchronous is all types of learning in which the learner and instructor are in the same place at the same time, same virtual place at the same time in order for learning to take place. So in-person classes, live online meetings when the whole class or smaller groups get together. So these are the live Zooms, Google Classroom, Google Meet, whatever that platform may be. And then asynchronous instruction is essentially everything else. So instruction that doesn't occur in the same place or at the same time, such as pre-recorded video lessons that students complete on their own, that's not being delivered in person or at least in real time. So a pre-recorded Zoom, Google presentation. So this presentation is asynchronous, right? Even though you all are watching it at the same time, it is recorded, so you could theoretically learn and view the presentation on your own time, at your own pace. The benefit of asynchronous instruction for students in schools is definitely time for comprehending complex material. Synchronous instruction benefits would be, participation, school connectedness, the social piece, engagement, right? So a balance between the two is key. And again, they're not doing any more than 50% of the day synchronous instruction in many districts, because the research is telling us that, in terms of a student's ability to really delve into material in an in-depth manner, for comprehension reasons and for just general equity and access, it's a bit unrealistic to expect much more than half the day for synchronous instruction. Okay, so what's the district required to do now with this new AB 7730, Section 34 California mandate? So there are 6 big bullet points here on this slide and the next slide. So 1, confirm or provide access for all students. So do they have technology and a Wi-Fi hotspot? Content aligned to grade level standards. Right? Before it was sort of the best effort. We're sending worksheets home. Sometimes it felt like busy work for parents. Again, it was sort of all over the place in terms of what was being sent home. And then academic and other supports designed to address the needs of students who are not performing at grade level. So these other supports, right? This could be for students who are English language learners, special education, students in foster care. So they are required to do something more for those students who need it. There was not that mandate before. It was sort of your best effort, be creative, make sure these students have an opportunity to access the instruction. They're held to a much higher standard now because of this new mandate. So special education, related services, and any other services required by a student's IEP, they're now requiring full implementation of IEP in the distance learning setting. So this includes accommodations necessary to ensure that the IEP can be executed in a distance learning environment, in other words, at home. So if an existing IEP is missing an accommodation that would be useful for the home, distance learning environment, that is something that a parent or a member of the IEP team can suggest in an amendment or something, and I'd recommend that that happens. There is designated and integrated instruction in English language development, and also daily live interaction with certificated employees and peers. So for the purpose of instruction, progress monitoring, and maintaining school connectedness. So the daily live interaction, this can be video or phone communication. If it's a teacher, it's likely going to be video communication in some sort of synchronous instruction format, right? So if it's not feasible as part of the regular instruction, the district and parent may create an alternative plan for that interaction. So this is something that parents should have input on. If it's hard to have that daily live interaction because of circumstances of the family's home situation, other siblings, health needs of family members, parents' work situation, whatever the case may be, there is something that should be worked. This is something that should be worked out between the district and the parent and be agreed upon. It's not the onus of the parent to figure it out. It is something that the district should be collaborating with you. Okay, so we're looking at 180 days of instruction for the fall. They must take attendance, and there's some language from the law, word for word here. So each district shall ensure that a weekly engagement record is completed for each student, documenting synchronous or asynchronous instruction. So there's record keeping essentially for the purposes of attendance and engagement, because we know now during this distance learning sort of experiment, school connectedness has fallen off the wayside. There are a lot more issues in mental health issues. Social isolation can lead to much higher levels of anxiety, depression, especially in adolescence. So this is definitely on the radar for educators going into the fall. Each school shall regularly communicate with parents and guardians regarding a student's academic progress. And of course, if they have needs beyond academics, of course, that's going to be something that at least the service provider or the appropriate educational stakeholder should be in contact with parent about regularly. Okay, so by September 30th of this year, districts need to have what's called a learning continuity and attendance plan. So most districts have this template already, a template, but they'll have that already because most schools start in August, which should outline some of the following. So the actions the district, the county office, or charter school will take, particularly for students who have experienced significant learning loss due to school closures. So these are our students. These are our students with IEPs, with special needs, who have experienced regression, who maybe went without IEP services for an extended period of time, hopefully not the entire remainder of the spring semester. But these are definitely students who, these are many of the students who we see at the center, and many of the students who we should be calling these IEP meetings about, right? So for students who have experienced significant learning loss due to school closure. So how do we know if they've experienced learning loss? This is something we're still all figuring out, both from the school side and parents, right? A lot of what the F.A.S.T team has been recommending to parents throughout this whole process is, please, whatever data you can take on your students' progress, take. Qualitative data is better than nothing. We definitely need to make sure that they're not regressing, at least maintaining the skills that they had before brick and mortar schools closed. So again, what additional supports for students with unique needs will be provided for ELLs and those with exceptional needs? So what are these additional supports, right? Do we need to increase service minutes because of this regression we've witnessed? Do we need to have different sort of service or accommodation? Like, what is it that we need in order to support a student who's actually regressed? Okay, so the second learning objective is supporting parent collaboration and advocacy with these school IEP teams. School IEP teams will be very busy this fall. We still don't know where the districts lie in terms of special ed assessments. There's not clear guidance in the California mandate on that. It's not something that school psychs and many service providers can do in a virtual platform. There's no precedent for it. So mostly what happened was when schools closed down, any assessments that had been completed, they could continue and have that IEP roll out services in a distance learning format. But if an assessment had not been completed, it basically froze. All other IEPs could continue. Some districts kept holding IEPs, some didn't, some paused and then resumed. So it's sort of across the board. So there are many overdue IEPs in most districts. They will be very busy trying to catch up this fall. So now, with the new mandate, IEP timelines and special ed services must continue without interruption for everyone, for all districts. So we want to encourage parents to be proactive in contacting their school IEP team. They'll likely be contacting parents as well because they have their own policies and mandates to not have outstanding IEPs, to have not have unsigned IEPs, and to make these meetings happen. But we want to encourage parents to be proactive also in contacting their IEP team, so they can reach out and ask about the distance learning schedule. Right? When is synchronous and asynchronous instruction happening? Is there a bell schedule? What does this look like? When are these services being provided? Right? So if it's a one-on-one service or what used to be a pull-out, when is that happening? With whom? And then who can I contact with concerns, and what's the best way to reach them? This is especially important if the parent's unable to support the student's academics, either because of their educational level, their availability, right? They need a point person. It might not be the teacher. The teacher's going to be really hard to get in touch with. You can think of them just as if they were teaching all day in the brick and mortar school building, right? They have live synchronous instruction happening most of the day. A lot of the rest of the day, they're going to be grading and reviewing that asynchronous instruction, holding office hours with students, IEP meetings, right? So if it's a service provider who the parent has rapport with already, I'd recommend that would be their contact person. They're going to be a lot more flexible in terms of their scheduling. Again, everyone's going to be crazy busy, but the teacher might be very hard to get in contact with. Or if the teacher really is the best person, that the case carrier, special education case carrier, maybe email is something that they could respond to more easily and more quickly than a phone call. So things to consider. We want to have a parent feel comfortable with one contact at least moving into the fall semester. Okay, so progress on IEP goals. I think I mentioned this earlier, but we want to encourage parents to take whatever data they can on their child's IEP goals. It might be difficult to gather quantitative data in the home setting, right? It's a different context, there's no group, but qualitative data are better than nothing. So something is better than nothing, especially when we're worried about regression for those more impacted students with more goals, with more needs and more services. If parents are having concerns about any issue at home, I recommend they consider whether it's something that can be added to the IEP. So maybe they weren't aware it was an issue before when the student was at school all day, but they're now seeing this issue, right? Oh, he's home so much more. I'm noticing, Johnny is stuttering in this context or in this situation. So asking for either consultation with that service provider, maybe additional minutes, maybe an additional goal, whatever the IEP team as a unit decides is appropriate. That's the go-to team, right? So just as if we were bringing concern to the IEP team, to the school IEP team in the middle of the year, in a regular year, we can bring concerns to that team. We might have a different concern or a newer concern or noticing things we never did before because we're spending so much more time with the kids at home, right? So this is definitely something that we'd encourage parents to do. And then consultation. So even though schools are required to have these daily live interactions with parents and students, the IEP has more teeth, right? It's federally mandated document. So we want to encourage parents to request an IEP meeting to discuss their concerns if they feel like they are not getting that level of support already from the school team. So if that's something that they need more of, they need more face time with a provider, with a teacher, request that meeting for an amendment meeting. Make it clear that you want to discuss a few things. Don't have a laundry list, but have one or two main concerns that are most critical. Because remember, IEP teams will be swamped, so you want to maximize the time in front of the team, clarify the needs of the kid. So it's ideal, again, if the parent has some sort of data to report on, even if it's their own notes. Qualitative data are better than nothing, right? And then most importantly, if the parent needs more support and they're just feeling like they're floundering, they're not getting support from the school team, have them request the addition of consultation minutes or parent training minutes as a related service on the IEP. So that will ensure that a service provider or a teacher in some situations will have that face-to-face, one-on-one interaction with parent on a somewhat regular basis, right? So at least monthly. An hour a month, can be extremely powerful for a parent when you have undivided attention of that service provider who knows the individual needs of the child. Speaking with the parent can talk about what's going on at home and what the service provider does not see, and they can offer their expertise. That can be a huge, powerful tool. So the consultation minutes, sometimes called parent training, as a related service on the IEP. That's something that I think teams will be getting a lot of requests for. They're familiar with those sorts of services. They're definitely going to be more common during the whole distance learning era. And more consultation. So consultation and parent training as a related service will allow the parent to have that face-to-face time with teachers, psychs, BCBAs, speech pathologists, OTs, PTs. They can help problem solve those issues that are going on at home, help them with just general strategies. They're a great person to ask, that service provider is a great person to ask for strategies that worked at school, right? What worked before? I'm having trouble with this. What happened at school? I never got calls about this not going well. What's the secret? So the collaboration is key. Okay, tips for communicating with your IEP team. First, assume good intentions, right? Districts are learning to adapt to the new educational landscape just like everyone else. The vast majority of the time, they have the best interest of the child in mind. So but they are all at different places as they sort of figure out how to move forward supporting students in this landscape. Identify the priorities, right? Don't come with a laundry list. Pick your battles, clarify the message, focus your efforts on like an issue or two of what's really getting in the way of your child's ability to make appropriate progress, access education. And then ask for what your child needs, right? It can't hurt to ask if it's more service minutes or that parent training and consultation. If you're seeing regression in particular, this is when we need to speak up and advocate for that kiddo. Craft a powerful story, right? So a lot of the educators are working behind the scenes and have been all summer on system support, right? So we're talking about supporting all students and then all special education students, all the high-risk students and high-need students. A personal narrative can sort of bring them back down to earth, bring it to light. What's been going on with this family, with this child? What are the needs here? Give examples. Many, members on the IEP team are parents themselves and dealing with these same issues. So just let them know what life looks like at home for the kiddo, what the difficulties are, and then what might help support them. Hold the school IEP team accountable, right? We know what the expectations are from the California mandate. Districts are likely going to be much more proactive, getting ahead of these sorts of things now, but there's no reason we can't all be accountable. And then avoid threats, right? We want to be pragmatic, collaborative, and just move the needle on these issues. So threats will hinder that. And then focus on the question. So, what's the policy for this? Are there directives for that? What's the plan? How can we do this? Who can help, right? There are a lot of people available for support who are working very hard, figuring things out day by day. staying, up to date on public health orders, seeing what it means for all the different groups of students that attend schools. So the questions are important, and if someone doesn't know, they can, find out, and that can be part of the collaborative process. Okay, and then identifying strategies to use at home. Parents should do their best to maintain realistic expectations. So they're balancing a lot. This was pretty much the only sort of FAST referral we got for March, April, and most of May was, essentially, how do I do this? And again, there's no precedent for it, right? There was no clear answer. A lot of the resources that were available were saying more or less the same thing, right? So establish a routine and a physical location to do work and all of these things, which are 100% true. And I say them again in this presentation. But having realistic expectations is super important because parents are balancing much more than their child's educational needs. There's the schoolwork, but communication with the school, their own work responsibilities, they're likely working at home, or if not, right, who is at home with the child, other family members and children, cooking, cleaning, shopping, tech needs for distance learning, financial strain, physical and mental health needs of them or other family members. So they're balancing a whole lot. They can't be parent and teacher in every facet. So they're going to have to prioritize, and that's okay when some things fall off the wayside. That's to be expected. We just have to prioritize and figure out which things are most important. So part of the setting realistic expectations, parents should not expect to play the role of teacher. Instead, focus on what skills their child appears to have generalized. So from the school environment to the home environment, or from the home environment to the community setting, whenever, what limited locations that's observable. And then what supports the child may need in order to be successful with distance learning. So what's missing from this equation, right? We need to keep in mind some students will do better during distance learning, and some will do much worse. And this is both academically and socially emotionally. Some students on the spectrum have loved distance learning, right? The socially complex environment of school, which typically brings on a lot of stress and anxiety and not knowing how to interact and initiate, all that's eliminated. Very structured, Google Meets are the only interaction they are required to have throughout the day, or they had entirely asynchronous learning. They loved it, right? So they're not growing and making progress, but socially, emotionally, they're much less anxious. Depression was lower, right? Other students, it's the opposite, especially, when we think about isolation, social isolation in teens, suicidality, anxiety, depression can go through the roof. So every student is going to be experiencing this much differently. So we want to empower parents to at least keep tabs on how their children are feeling as we move into the fall with this distance learning environment. Positive praise is something that is likely going out the window in terms of, because naturally so, because we've been in survival mode for students, getting education at home. So among other things, the student has likely experienced a decrease in positive adult attention. So it's important to let them know when they're doing well, no matter how small the behavior, even if it's being focused and on task for 2 minutes in a Google Meet classroom, right? So we want to remind parents, hey, you can give small rewards for effort. This is a very big change for everyone. We can reward effort. We can reserve the bigger rewards to the big successes, right? Attending for the entirety of a group lesson or something. Aim for a ratio of 3 to 1. So 3 positive praise statements for every 1 corrective comment given at home whenever the child's not, engaged in a live lesson. So if a parent is around observing their kiddo while they're doing, completing independent work, definitely have parents chime in and praise them when they see them doing what they need to be doing, when they're on task, when they're engaged. So routine and physical space, definitely important. If you can, work with the child to find and create the space with the least amount of distractions. Let them help set it up, choose materials, take some sort of ownership over that workspace, even if it's only temporarily, right? Even if that space is only available for the student during the live instruction, right? Give them some sort of ownership over that space. So most bell schedules will take the first half of the day, like I said, to organize the rest of these service providers' schedules and their ability to engage in one-on-one sessions, make parent calls, that sort of thing. But for the rest of the day, it's important to create a schedule with you and your child to provide structure, right? So if we only have structure from 8 to noon, the rest of the day, there's a lot of hours left there. So regular physical exercise, whether that's with the school or not, some sort of social interaction, maybe art, silent reading time, whatever works for you and your family and the schedule of what's happening in the home, go with that, right? It should be the path of least resistance while maintaining structure for the kid for the remainder of what is normally a school day, right? 3:30. Considering their input in that routine will definitely increase follow through on their part, right? If they're engaged and have a say in terms of what the rest of the day looks like for them, much less likely to have pushback. So when you do have pushback, consider the cause of the resistance. So a lot of times pushback, whether it's refusing to complete work or log on to meetings, that happens because of lack of clear understanding of what's expected. So whether that's unclear directions from the teacher, they haven't mastered some skill which they know is going to be asked of them when they log on, right? We might have to be a little bit of a detective and figure out what's going on the academic side. Enlist help from the school IEP team, especially the school psych or BCBA, if they have a BCBA. The teacher will be less available as they are not only providing that live instruction, but reviewing and grading, independent work, lesson planning, calling parents. They're doing a whole lot right now, especially during the day. The teacher will be much less available. So that's when I was saying earlier, if your point of contact can be someone who's not a teacher, go with that person. If it needs to be the teacher, that's fine too. If that's who the parent has rapport with, that's fantastic. But just know that it won't be likely as readily, they won't be as readily available as some other people on campus. And, is school avoidance an issue? There's actually language in the mandate that's saying each district shall develop written procedures for tiered re-engagement strategies for all those who are absent from distance learning from more than 3 school days, or 60% of the week. So there should be a plan for any student who is just not logging on. It shouldn't go for 3 days before you're hearing from anyone at the school, right? They're going to have tabs on that. I mentioned earlier the mental health needs. So again, during times of social isolation, there's definitely a greater risk for anxiety, depression, suicidality, especially with teens. So we encourage parents to talk to their child, especially if there's a history of these sorts of mental health concerns. So we want to give them the resources so that the parent will never be a barrier to seeking support, even if that's just a phone number or a text line. Let them know if there's stigma there. Let them know, talking to the child about suicide does not give them the idea to do it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There are some hotlines here for English and Spanish. There's also a text line now. You can text TALK to 741-741. And a cool side note, this actually happened in the last couple of weeks with the FCC, is by July 2022, enforcing that all carriers have to implement a national 988 suicide hotline, which will be pretty neat. So we're a ways away from that happening still, but that will be great in terms of access for all people who are experiencing some sort of mental health crisis. Okay, so that is the end of the slideshow. I'm going to be emailing Chelsea a whole bunch of other resources um, and the research supporting a lot of what was in this presentation. Definitely feel free to email either myself or John Ann. I know, um, you know, these things are changing still day to day. So we're definitely doing our best to, keep ahead of these public health orders and also the California mandates in terms of what the guidance with the districts are. So definitely, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you all so much. All right, take care.